You don't do amazing.
Michael, come over here, come here.
Stay in the jaws of his old enemy, the crocodile. 5, 6, 7, 8.
Some young fellas. Now, ladies, don't let them break your heart.
I've been doing this a long time. I've never heard a voice.
So the volume, it can make your voice sound.
You can ask me anything, anytime you want.
1, 2, 3. I'll sing 1, 2, 3, baby, you are eager. Come on, Mike. Food because all they eat is vegetables. And they're really smart, very intelligent.
I do understand. I knew you were different. Tell me.
The first sound is not applause. It is a leather belt snapping against a wooden chair. 8-year-old Michael Jackson stands frozen in the cramped living room of his family's home in Gary, Indiana, while his brothers tighten their fingers around guitars and microphones. Their father, Joseph, watches from the shadows, his face hard, his patience already disappearing. One missed note, one lazy step, one pair of wandering eyes, and the punishment begins. Michael's knees tremble, but when the music starts, something inside him changes. His shoulders loosen. His small voice fills the room. Suddenly, the frightened child is gone, replaced by someone Joseph has never seen before. Joseph works long hours at the steel mill, but he refuses to let his sons inherit the same life. Every evening, he turns their home into a rehearsal room. Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael repeat the same movements until sweat darkens their shirts and their feet sting against the floor. Catherine watches from the doorway, proud yet uneasy, because she sees what ambition is doing to her children. Michael is the youngest, the smallest, the easiest to overlook, except when he sings. Then everyone becomes still. His voice carries a depth that does not belong to a little boy. Joseph hears opportunity, Catherine hears a gift. Michael only hears freedom. Outside that house, other children race bicycles through the streets and laugh beneath the afternoon sun. Michael watches them through the window. For a moment, his hand touches the glass. He wants to run outside, scrape his knees, make friends, and return home before dark like an ordinary child. But Joseph calls his name. Rehearsal. Again, Michael turns away from the window and walks back toward the music. He tells himself the stage will be worth it. Maybe one day the cheering will become louder than the fear. Maybe success will finally make his father smile. But deep inside, another thought takes root. What happens if nothing is ever enough? The brothers begin performing wherever anyone will let them. Small clubs, school events, crowded halls thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of spilled drinks. The rooms are rough, the audiences impatient. Then Michael steps forward. His feet strike the stage with startling precision. His face twists with emotion far beyond his years. Conversations stop, glasses lower. Strangers lean closer. Joseph watches from the side, not clapping, not smiling, but calculating. Each performance becomes another rung on a ladder only he can see. Afterward, Michael searches his father's face for approval. Joseph gives him corrections instead. Stand straighter. Look at the crowd. Never let them see fear. One night, the boys return home exhausted, carrying their instruments through the cold. Catherine finds Michael awake, long after everyone else has fallen asleep. He is sitting beside a lamp, reading a story about magical lands where children never grow older. She brushes a hand across his hair and tells him he should rest. Michael closes the book but does not move. Quietly, he admits that children at school no longer treat him normally. Some want his autograph. Others tease him. None of them really know him. Catherine's smile fades. She pulls him close. but Michael's eyes remain fixed on the dark window. The world is beginning to notice him, and already he feels alone. Then comes Chicago, the Regal Theater, a real stage, a real crowd, and a chance that could change everything. Backstage, Joseph checks every collar and every shoe while the boys listen to the roar beyond the curtain. Michael's breathing grows shallow. His fingers feel cold. This room is bigger than the others. One mistake could follow them all the way home. Joseph bends down and tells him to keep his eyes on the audience. Michael nods. The curtain opens. Light crashes across his face. For half a second, he cannot see anything. Then the rhythm begins. His body moves before fear can stop it. The crowd rises, and a woman named Suzanne DePass watches in disbelief. After the performance, Suzanne approaches Joseph with a possibility. Motown. The name alone changes the air. Motown is not another smoky club or neighborhood contest. It is the home of stars, the machine turning voices into legends. Joseph remains controlled, but his grip tightens around the card she gives him. Back at home, Catherine prays while the brothers celebrate. Michael sits quietly among them. Everyone talks about records, television, money, and escape from Gary. Yet he remembers Suzanne staring at him during the performance, as though she had seen something no one else could see. It excites him. It frightens him. Because being discovered means the dream is real, and so is the price. Soon, the family stands inside Motown, surrounded by polished floors, studio equipment, and photographs of artists who seem almost untouchable. Berry Gordy enters expecting another hopeful family act. Then Michael begins to sing. Silence. Barry's expression changes. He is no longer watching 5 talented brothers. He is watching one small boy carrying a force powerful enough to reshape the entire room. Joseph sees it too, and pride flickers across his face at last. But Michael notices something colder beneath it. From this moment forward, the music will belong to millions of people. His voice will open every door. And somewhere behind him, the door to his childhood quietly closes. Motown does not give the Jackson brothers time to breathe. The moment the contracts are signed, their days become a blur of rehearsals, vocal sessions, costume fittings, and lessons on how to smile for cameras even when their legs ache. Berry Gordy wants perfection, but a different kind from Joseph's. Joseph rules through fear. Motown rules through possibility. Every polished hallway seems to whisper the same promise: behave, perform, and the whole world will love you. Michael believes it. He has to. Because if this dream fails, then every punishment, every lonely night, every childhood moment he surrendered will have meant nothing. The family leaves Gary behind and enters a world brighter than anything Michael has imagined. Los Angeles glows beneath endless sunlight. Expensive cars glide past palm trees. Famous singers walk through the Motown offices as if legends are ordinary people. Diana Ross welcomes the boys with warmth, presenting them to the public as something fresh, joyful, unstoppable. In photographs, Michael stands close to her, smiling beneath his wide hat. The cameras adore him. Reporters ask about his voice, his dancing, his future. Nobody asks whether he misses home. Nobody asks what happens after the lights go out. Their first major single explodes across the radio. Then another follows. And another. I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save. Each song climbs higher until the Jackson 5 are no longer chasing success. Success is chasing them. Crowds flood airports. Girls scream until security barriers shake. Children copy Michael's clothes and practice his movements in bedroom mirrors. On stage, he appears fearless. He spins, points, smiles, and commands thousands of people with one raised hand. But backstage, his chest heaves as strangers grab at his sleeves. The applause he once dreamed about has finally become louder than Joseph's voice. Somehow, it still does not silence him. Joseph monitors everything. A wrong step during rehearsal becomes a lecture. A tired expression becomes disrespect. He reminds the brothers that one weak performance can destroy them all. Michael begins studying his father's face the way other children study storybooks, searching for clues about what comes next. A tightened jaw means anger. Folded arms mean disappointment. Silence is worst. Silence means the punishment has not yet chosen its shape. Catherine tries to soften the edges, praying with the children and reminding them that their talent is a blessing. Yet even she cannot stop the machine now. Too many careers, too much money, too many expectations are attached to Michael's small shoulders. Touring turns time into something strange. Cities change, hotel rooms change, crowds change, but Michael's life remains the same. Wake up, rehearse, perform, smile, leave. He watches other children from behind tinted car windows, their faces disappearing as the vehicle carries him toward another arena. Sometimes, fans wait outside his hotel all night. Their voices rise through the glass like waves. Michael presses his ear to the window and listens. They say they love him. Thousands of people love him. So why does he feel as though nobody can reach him? One evening, after another sold-out show, the brothers celebrate in a crowded room filled with music, laughter, and people Michael barely knows. He slips away unnoticed. At the end of a quiet hallway, he finds a mirror. Stage makeup still covers his face. His smile looks perfect because he has practiced it 1,000 times. Slowly, he lets it disappear. The child staring back seems exhausted, older around the eyes than he should be. For one dangerous second, Michael cannot tell where the performer ends and the real boy begins. Then footsteps approach. His smile returns instantly, automatic, flawless. The door opens, and no one suspects a thing. But the industry is watching more than the group's success. Producers notice that audiences lean forward whenever Michael sings. Interviewers direct most of their questions toward him. Photographers place him in the center. His brothers see it too. Jermaine remains confident, but something guarded enters his expression whenever executives praise Michael alone. Jackie tries to keep everyone united. Marlon jokes. Tito stays quiet. The bond between them is still real, yet fame has begun pulling at it from 5 different directions. Michael feels guilty for standing out, but he cannot make himself smaller. The moment music enters his body, it demands everything. Berry Gordy finally calls Michael into a private meeting. The office is calm, almost too calm, with gold records shining along the walls. Berry speaks gently about growth, opportunity, and the rare kind of talent that appears once in a generation. Then he places a song in front of Michael, a song meant for his voice alone. No brothers beside him. No shared name on the record, just Michael. He stares at the page while excitement and fear twist together inside his stomach. A solo record could take him somewhere even the Jackson 5 cannot reach. It could also change the family forever. Outside the office, Joseph waits. So do his brothers. Michael lifts his eyes and realizes everyone expects him to choose. But the choice may already have been made. Michael says yes, but the word barely leaves his mouth. It feels less like a decision and more like stepping onto a moving train. His first solo recordings are wrapped in the same bright Motown sound that made the Jackson 5 famous, yet the studio feels different without his brothers beside him. No shared jokes between takes, no familiar shoulders touching his beneath the microphones. Only producers behind glass, watching the smallest movement of his lips. When Got to Be There begins climbing the charts, everyone congratulates him. Michael smiles. Then he returns to the family home and wonders whether success can separate people before they realize they are drifting apart. Jermaine tries to hide his disappointment, but Michael notices the pauses in their conversations. The way praise becomes quieter when it belongs to only one brother. Joseph speaks of strategy, not feelings. He says the family must use every opportunity placed before them. Michael understands the words, yet guilt still crawls beneath his skin. He never asked to be the center. He only wanted to sing. But fame keeps moving the spotlight until everyone else is standing in shadow, and Michael begins to fear that his gift might also be the thing that breaks the people he loves most. Then his body starts changing. His face lengthens. His voice deepens. The child Motown sold to the world is disappearing, and the industry does not know what to do with the young man taking his place. Executives study him with concerned expressions. Songs that once felt effortless now sit awkwardly in his throat. Fans still scream, but their attention begins shifting toward newer acts, younger faces, fresher voices. Michael sees the change in magazine covers and chart positions. For years, he has been told that love comes through applause. Now the applause is fading, and he has no idea who he is without it. He becomes painfully aware of his appearance. A careless joke from Joseph about his nose lands harder than any rehearsal punishment. Michael laughs because everyone else does, then avoids mirrors for the rest of the day. Cameras feel crueler now. Photographers ask him to turn his face toward the light, and he wonders which angle makes him look least like the person he has started to dislike. On stage, he still moves with confidence. Off stage, his hands drift toward his face as though he can hide behind his own fingers. People see a successful young star. Michael sees every imperfection magnified beneath studio lights. Catherine finds him alone one evening, sitting in darkness with headphones pressed over his ears. He is not listening to one of his own records. He is studying James Brown, Jackie Wilson, Fred Astaire, artists who seem to control every breath, every gesture, every inch of the stage. Michael rewinds the same moments again and again. A turn, a pause, a sudden explosion of movement. Catherine tells him he has already achieved more than most people ever will. Michael removes the headphones and looks at her with tired eyes. But I haven't shown them what I really hear yet, he says. That hunger begins consuming him. While his brothers relax after rehearsals, Michael stays behind. He practices until sweat runs into his eyes and the soles of his shoes feel thin. He does not merely copy the great performers. He studies why their movements make audiences feel something. He learns that stillness can be louder than motion, that a pause before a note can create more tension than the note itself, that the body can speak before the voice begins. Alone in the studio, he starts building a version of himself no executive has designed. Sharper, stranger, completely controlled. But Motown still sees the Jacksons as the boys who once sang ABC. Michael asks for more creative freedom. He wants deeper songs, stronger rhythms, and control over how the music is shaped. The executives offer polite smiles and familiar formulas. Joseph grows frustrated. The family has delivered hit after hit, yet the label still owns the direction of their future. Quiet conversations begin behind closed doors. Lawyers appear. Contracts are placed across tables. Leaving Motown could free them, but Jermaine is married to Berry Gordy's daughter, Hazel. For him, the label is no longer merely business. It is family. When the brothers finally decide to walk away, Jermaine refuses to go with them. The announcement cuts through the room like broken glass. Michael stares at the brother who once stood beside him on every stage, unable to find the right words. Nobody shouts at first. That makes it worse. Joseph's jaw tightens. Catherine lowers her eyes. Jermaine insists he must choose his own life, just as Michael chose his solo career. The truth hits Michael in the chest. He has spent years fearing that success would divide them. Now it has. The group signs with a new label, replaces Jermaine with Randy, and begins again under a new name, the Jacksons. They finally gain space to write and shape their own music. Michael should feel free. Instead, he carries the empty space where Jermaine used to stand. Every performance reminds him that dreams demand payment, and sometimes they collect from the people closest to you. Then a film offer arrives. Michael will play the Scarecrow in The Wiz, surrounded by artists far beyond the world of his brothers, and on that set, he is about to meet the man who will change his music forever. The set of The Wiz feels like another universe. Giant streets rise beneath studio lights. Dancers move through clouds of smoke. Diana Ross stands at the center of it all, but Michael does not arrive like a superstar. He arrives early, memorizes everyone's movements, and rehearses until the Scarecrow's awkward steps become strangely graceful. The costume hides his face beneath makeup and scraps of fabric. For once, he can disappear inside someone else. Then Quincy Jones hears him sing, not the child from the Jackson 5, not the carefully packaged Motown star, something older, hungrier, unfinished. Quincy watches Michael between takes and notices what others miss. Michael asks questions about every instrument. He listens to the orchestra rehearsing even when he is not needed. He studies arrangements the way a detective studies evidence. One afternoon, Michael approaches Quincy and quietly asks whether he knows a producer who might understand the sound inside his head. Quincy smiles. "Why not me?" The answer surprises him. Record executives believe Quincy is too sophisticated, too rooted in jazz, and Michael is still seen as a former child star. On paper, the partnership makes no sense. That is exactly why Michael wants it. Inside the studio, Quincy tears away everything familiar. He pushes Michael toward rawer vocals, heavier rhythms, and songs that demand more than sweetness. Michael records "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough," with his body moving in front of the microphone, snapping his fingers, striking the air, chasing each beat as though it might escape. When he hears the finished track, his eyes widen. This is it. The sound he has been trying to explain. Bright, urgent, alive. For the first time, Michael does not feel like a voice placed inside someone else's design. The music sounds like him. Off the wall erupts. Dance floors shake. Radios play the songs endlessly. Critics who dismissed him as a fading child performer are forced to look again. Michael steps onto stages in glittering clothes. His movements sharper. His confidence transformed. Millions buy the album. Yet when the major awards arrive, the recognition feels painfully small. Michael watches other names being called, while his smile remains fixed for the cameras. Inside, something hardens. 10 million records are not enough. Praise is not enough. He does not want to be successful anymore. He wants to create something so powerful the world cannot look away. Quincy warns him that chasing perfection can destroy the joy that created the music. Michael listens, then returns to work. He fills notebooks with ideas. He studies films, photographs, classical compositions, and the sounds of machines. He listens for rhythms in footsteps, doors, engines, even his own breathing. The studio becomes his sanctuary and his prison. Sessions stretch deep into the night. If a vocal feels slightly wrong, he records it again, and again, and again. Musicians leave exhausted while Michael remains beneath the dim lights, hearing flaws no one else can detect. The frightened boy from Gary is still searching for approval. Only now, his father's face has been replaced by the entire world. Joseph watches Michael's independence grow and feels his control slipping. Arguments begin over management, money, and loyalty. Joseph insists that family created Michael's success. Michael knows that is partly true, which makes resisting him even harder. During one confrontation, Joseph's voice fills the room just as it did when Michael was 8. But Michael does not lower his eyes this time. His hands tremble at his sides, yet he tells his father he wants control of his own career. Silence follows. Heavy. Dangerous. Joseph looks at him not as a son, but as someone walking away from everything he built. Michael leaves the room shaken, expecting freedom to feel lighter. It does not. He has finally confronted the man he feared most, but the fear remains inside him. Every criticism still sounds like Joseph. Every imperfect note feels like punishment approaching. Michael realizes the truth too late. Escaping his father does not mean escaping what his father planted in him. The discipline, the shame, the desperate need to be undeniable. They are now part of his voice, his movement, his ambition. Then Michael and Quincy begin discussing the next album. Michael says he wants every song to be a hit. No filler, no safe choices. He wants rock listeners, pop listeners, black audiences, white audiences, everyone. Quincy calls the goal impossible. Michael's expression does not change. On a table between them lies a collection of unfinished songs, among them one dark track with a different title. When the music starts, Michael hears footsteps, a closing door, and something breathing in the shadows. The album that will make him immortal has begun. The sessions for Thriller do not feel like the making of an album. They feel like a war against limitation. Michael and Quincy argue over tempos, arrangements, even the space between drum beats. Some songs are cut. Others are rebuilt until nothing remains of the first version. Michael records vocals in darkness because he wants no distractions, no faces judging him through the glass. He sings until his throat burns, then asks for another take. When Billie Jean begins to form, Quincy doubts the long bass introduction. Michael refuses to shorten it. He says the beat makes him want to dance. That is enough. For once, he does not bend. The album arrives, and the world changes slowly at first, then all at once. Billie Jean spreads through radios, clubs, bedrooms, and city streets. Beat It tears through the boundary between rock and pop. Wanna Be Startin' Somethin' feels like electricity trapped inside vinyl, but television remains guarded. MTV rarely plays black artists in heavy rotation, and Michael's videos are treated like a risk. The resistance is polite, corporate, almost invisible. That makes it more infuriating. His music is everywhere, yet one of the most powerful platforms in America hesitates to show his face. Michael has spent his entire life being told that talent opens doors. Now he learns some doors are designed to stay closed. Pressure builds until Billie Jean finally enters rotation. The response is immediate. Viewers stop changing channels. Requests flood in. Ratings climb. Suddenly, the same executives who hesitated want more. Michael understands what has happened, but he does not celebrate loudly. He has not merely earned a place inside the system. He has exposed the lie behind the gate. Still, that victory creates a new problem. Every next move must be bigger, better, impossible. The boy who once begged to be noticed is now terrified the world might look away. Then comes Motown's 25th anniversary special. Michael agrees to reunite with his brothers, but he asks for one thing. After their performance, he wants the stage alone. Backstage, he wears a black sequin jacket, cropped trousers, white socks, and a single sparkling glove. His brothers finish their set to thunderous applause. Michael embraces them, then remains beneath the lights as the opening pulse of Billie Jean begins. The audience settles. He tilts his hat. His body locks into the rhythm. Every movement is clean, controlled, almost inhuman. Then he glides backward. Silence. For one impossible second, his feet appear to ignore the floor. The crowd erupts before the move is even finished. Michael keeps dancing, but inside, something cracks open. All those years studying James Brown, Fred Astaire, every gesture and pause, now they belong to him. The moonwalk lasts only moments, yet by morning it belongs to the world. Children drag socks across kitchen floors. Adults replay the tape until the image flickers. Newspapers describe the performance as if they witnessed history being invented in real time. Michael watches the recording alone and sees only the turn he missed. Thriller becomes more than an album. It becomes an event without an ending. Sales climb into numbers no one imagined. Awards cover shelves. Crowds become uncontrollable. When Michael arrives anywhere, streets close and bodies press against barriers. His face appears on magazines across the planet. Joseph is proud now, openly proud, but the approval Michael once craved arrives too late to heal anything. Michael thanks him, smiles, then retreats into work. Each achievement brings a few seconds of warmth before the emptiness returns. He has become the most famous entertainer alive, yet privacy disappears so completely that even loneliness must be hidden. Determined to push further, Michael turns the song Thriller into a short film. The budget frightens executives. The horror imagery frightens his religious family. The length frightens television programmers. Michael keeps going. He studies camera angles, creature designs, choreography, and editing with the same obsession he once gave to records. On set, surrounded by dancers transformed into the dead, he finally looks joyful. Monsters make sense to him. They are frightening on the outside, wounded underneath, and safest when performing. When the film premieres, audiences crowd around televisions as if the broadcast is a national ceremony. Music videos will never be small again. But the machine needs more appearances, more deals, more access. During a commercial shoot for Pepsi, Michael stands beneath stage lights as pyrotechnics explode behind him. The first takes go smoothly, then timing slips. A burst of fire ignites his hair. At first he keeps dancing. He does not know. Crew members rush forward, tackling the flames as the smell of burned hair and chemicals fills the air. Michael is carried away with severe burns across his scalp. Cameras capture everything. The panic, the stretcher, the star suddenly fragile beneath flashing lights. Pain follows him into recovery. Doctors treat the wound, but the damage goes deeper than skin. His scalp throbs. Sleep becomes difficult. Medication dulls the agony and softens the edges of the world. For the first time, Michael finds a silence stronger than music. He tells himself the pills are temporary, necessary, controlled. Yet each dose offers something fame never has. A few hours without pressure, fear, or memory. When he returns to public view, his smile is still flawless. The glove still sparkles. The crowds still roar. But behind the curtain, Michael has discovered a door he may not know how to close. The fire heals, but Michael does not return as the same man. Pain has entered his private world, and medication has taught him how quickly suffering can disappear. He buries himself in work before anyone can notice. New songs, new choreography, new costumes. He tells his team the next era must prove. Thriller was not an accident. Yet every meeting begins with the same question: how can he top the biggest album in history? Michael hears the doubt beneath their smiles. Once again, the whole world is waiting for him to fail. He responds with bad. The sound is harder, the image sharper. Black leather replaces glitter. Michael stares into cameras with a defiance that feels rehearsed until the music begins. Then it becomes real. The album produces hit after hit, and his concerts grow into massive spectacles of light, steel, smoke, and precision. On stage, he commands entire stadiums with a flick of his wrist. Off stage, he becomes more guarded. Hotel floors are sealed. Curtains remain closed. Security surrounds every doorway. The larger his audience becomes, the smaller his real life feels. Michael begins building a place where reality cannot reach him. Neverland is filled with rides, animals, trains, trees, and laughter. The childhood he never had, rebuilt across thousands of acres. Children visit and run freely through a world designed by a man who still remembers watching other kids play through a window. Michael joins them, laughing with a softness rarely seen in public. To him, Neverland is innocence made physical, but outside its gates, the world sees something else. Reporters circle. Cameras wait. Every unusual choice becomes a headline. His changing appearance becomes a public obsession. The surgeries, the skin, the masks, the whispers. Michael says little, which allows strangers to say everything. Tabloids invent stories faster than he can deny them. He purchases strange objects. He sleeps in an oxygen chamber. He wants to live forever. Each lie makes him retreat further, and each retreat makes the stories grow. His face becomes familiar to billions, yet almost no one recognizes the frightened man behind it. Michael reads the headlines alone. Sometimes he laughs. Sometimes his hands shake so badly he cannot hold the paper. Then the accusation arrives. The words move through his world like poison. Lawyers speak. Telephones ring without stopping. News vans gather outside the gates of Neverland. People who once begged for access now discuss him as though they have always known the truth. Michael denies the allegation, but denial cannot compete with spectacle. His name appears beside words he cannot bear to hear. Catherine calls him and prays through tears. His brothers offer support, though old wounds still live between them. Joseph speaks about fighting back. Michael barely responds. For the first time, the performer who controlled every stage has no idea what movement comes next. The investigation strips away what remains of his privacy. His home is searched, his body becomes evidence. The humiliation is clinical, cold, impossible to explain. Michael stands beneath harsh light while strangers document him, and something inside him shuts down. He has spent his life being examined, his voice, his face, his skin, his body. But this is different. This feels like being erased while still alive. When he finally leaves, he walks slowly, his shoulders folded inward. No music, no cameras he can control, just silence. A settlement is reached in the civil case without an admission of wrongdoing. Some interpret it as survival. Others call it guilt. Michael discovers that legal closure cannot close the story people have already chosen to believe. His career continues, but the air around him has changed. Every smile is questioned, every friendship examined, every gesture replayed. He releases new music, performs before enormous crowds, and tries to outrun the narrative. Yet the accusation follows him from country to country, patient as a shadow. Years later, another criminal case explodes around him. This time, Michael refuses to disappear. He enters the courthouse each morning in tailored suits, walking past screaming supporters and cameras hungry for collapse. Inside, testimony tears through his reputation. Outside, fans hold signs and sing his songs. His body weakens under the pressure. His face tightens. Some days he needs help walking. Still, he returns. Then the verdicts are read. Not guilty, again. Not guilty on every count. For a moment, Michael closes his eyes. His family exhales. Supporters erupt outside. The physical battle is over. He has survived the courtroom. But when he returns to Neverland, the rides are silent, the pathways empty, and the place he built to protect innocence no longer feels safe. He has won his freedom. He just does not know what remains of his life. Neverland is no longer home. Michael leaves behind the empty rides, the train tracks, the rooms once filled with music and children's laughter. He travels from place to place, surrounded by assistants, security, doctors, and advisors, yet the loneliness follows. His 3 children become the center of his world. With them, his voice softens. He reads stories, prepares small surprises, and tries to give them the ordinary moments he never had. He shields their faces from cameras because he knows what it means to have childhood taken by strangers. Around them, he is not the king of pop. He is simply dad. But the life he built is collapsing under its own weight. Legal bills rise. Properties require money. Business partners speak in numbers too large to feel real. Michael owns a priceless music catalog and carries debts that tighten around him with every passing month. People close to him offer solutions, contracts, plans. Their voices overlap until trust becomes impossible. Some seem devoted. Others see only an opportunity. Michael has spent decades surrounded by crowds, but now he struggles to identify who would remain if the money, access, and fame disappeared. Then comes the proposal, 50 concerts in London. At first, Michael agrees to 10. 10 feels possible. A return, not a surrender. But demand explodes, and 10 becomes 50. The announcement electrifies the world. Tickets vanish almost instantly. Fans who grew up with his music prepare to introduce him to their children. Cameras gather as Michael steps onto a stage and promises, "This is it." His voice is gentle. His smile is careful. To the audience, the words sound triumphant. To Michael, they carry another meaning, one final chance to reclaim the story of his life. Rehearsals begin with enormous ambition. Moving platforms, explosions, giant screens. Dancers who have worshipped Michael since childhood stand trembling when he enters the room. He remains quiet until the music starts. Then his body remembers. He slides across the floor, corrects a musician's note, and shapes every beam of light with precise gestures. The audience deserves more, he says. His frame looks painfully thin, but the performer inside him still burns. For brief moments, everyone sees the old magic. Not nostalgia, not imitation, Michael. Yet behind the rehearsals, his body is failing. Sleep will not come. Nights stretch endlessly while pressure circles inside his mind. 50 concerts. Financial survival. Public judgment. The fear of disappointing his children. The fear of disappointing everyone. Medication becomes the answer to every problem until it creates problems of its own. Doctors move in and out. Warnings are ignored or softened. Michael asks only for rest. A few silent hours. Enough strength to stand beneath the lights again. On the evening of June 24, 2009, Michael rehearses at the Staples Center. He appears focused, energized, almost reborn. He sings, dances, and discusses details for the next rehearsal. Crew members leave believing the impossible show is finally taking shape. Michael returns to the rented house in Holmby Hills and tells people he is happy with the progress. His children sleep nearby. Costumes wait. The stage waits. The world waits. Morning arrives. Michael does not wake. Inside the house, panic tears through the quiet. Calls are made. Hands press against his chest. An ambulance races through Los Angeles while news begins spreading before the hospital can confirm it. Outside, people gather. Phones ring across continents. Radio stations interrupt programming. Fans refuse to believe the words appearing on their screens. The man whose music seemed able to stop time has run out of it. The announcement lands like a global shockwave. Streets fill with his songs. Strangers cry together beneath television screens. At Neverland, flowers cover the gates. In Gary, people gather near the small house where a frightened boy once practiced until his feet hurt. Sales rise. Videos replay. Every stage of his life returns at once. The child with the impossible voice, the young man gliding backward, the isolated figure hidden behind gates, the father holding his children close. At the memorial, Paris stands before the microphone. Her hands shake. The world has spent years arguing over who Michael Jackson was, but she speaks only of the man she knew. Her father, her protector. Her voice breaks, and the mythology falls away. For one moment, fame becomes small beside a child's grief. Michael spent his life chasing a sound powerful enough to erase fear, loneliness, and the voice telling him he would never be enough. He never found silence while he was alive. But the music remains, spinning through homes, streets, and generations, carrying the boy from Gary farther than even he imagined. And somewhere inside every opening beat, that little boy is still standing beneath the light. This time, no one can make him afraid. Antoine Fuqua was never the obvious director for a Michael Jackson biopic. His reputation was forged through pressure cooker thrillers. Training Day, Olympus Has Fallen, and the Equalizer trilogy. Men cornered by violence. Heroes and anti-heroes discovering what remains when the world strips away their control. Yet that pattern makes Michael less of a career detour than it initially appears. Fuqua approaches Jackson as another man under pressure, except the battlefield is fame, the weapon is performance, and the enemy is a childhood that never releases its grip. The film's central idea is established immediately. Before Michael Jackson became an icon, he was a frightened boy learning that perfection might be his only route to freedom. Fuqua also brought something many action directors do not possess: a genuine musical foundation. Before feature films, he developed his visual instincts directing music videos and commercials during the 1990s. That background matters. He understands that a concert sequence cannot merely record choreography. It must communicate electricity, the invisible current passing between performer and crowd. In Michael, the camera treats Jackson's stage presence almost like a superpower. Fuqua even described beginning production with Jaafar Jackson performing Bad before hundreds of extras as a test of whether the actor could wear the cape. He could. The director reportedly saw that first major performance and realized the film had found its emotional center. But Fuqua's vision was not simply imitation. His declared obsession was authenticity. Havenhurst, the Jackson family compound, became a filming location. The thriller recreation returned to the original setting. Musicians and choreographers connected to Jackson were brought into the process. Costume designer Marcy Rogers compared recreated outfits directly with originals, while Jackson's actual Grammy trophies appeared on camera. Fuqua and cinematographer Dion Beebe even mixed digital photography with limited 16mm and 35mm footage, using period lenses, lighting, and film references to make each era feel materially different. Watch closely, and the decades do not merely change through hairstyles. The texture changes. History begins to breathe. That fixation on exactness explains the film's greatest pleasure. Fuqua wants audiences to experience cultural memories at full volume. Motown rehearsals, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, The Birth of Thriller, Motown 25, and The Bad Tour. These scenes are not tossed in as biographical checkpoints. They are treated like sacred reconstructions. Crowd noise surges. Bodies move in waves. Jackson appears to control the atmosphere by lifting a hand. Fuqua understands that explaining Michael Jackson's popularity would never be enough. The film has to temporarily recreate it. You need to feel why millions screamed before you can understand what that screaming did to the person receiving it. The project's deeper creative architect, however, was producer Graham King. After shepherding Bohemian Rhapsody, King pursued another music biography built for theatrical scale, working with screenwriter John Logan and securing access to Jackson's catalog through cooperation with the estate. Lionsgate and GK Films backed the production, with Universal handling international distribution. This was never designed as a modest psychological portrait. It was conceived as an event, a film where spectators could sing, remember, and possibly discover Jackson through communal experience rather than isolated streaming. That ambition is visible in every packed arena and lovingly reconstructed costume. Michael does not whisper its subject's importance. It builds a stage large enough to announce it. And here is the catch. Authenticity and authorization are not the same thing. Jackson's estate supported the film, estate representatives received producer credits, and Michael is portrayed by his nephew, Jaafar Jackson. The production maintained that Graham King retained creative control, but the proximity remains impossible to ignore. A family-supported biography may possess extraordinary access: music, locations, objects, memories, while still viewing its subject through protective glass. That tension shapes Fuqua's entire approach. His film humanizes Jackson's pain, loneliness, and artistic obsession, but it also organizes that complexity into a fundamentally heroic journey. The access makes the film richer. The allegiance makes it narrower. Both things can be true. The clearest evidence is the timeline. Rather than cover Jackson's complete life, the film moves from the Jackson 5 years toward his emergence as an independent creative force, concluding around the 1988 Bad Tour. The later allegations that transformed public discussion of Jackson are absent. As a result, Fuqua frames the story around liberation from Joe Jackson. A sensitive child is disciplined into a performer. The performer becomes a phenomenon, and the phenomenon finally claims control of his identity. It is emotionally coherent, dramatically effective, and undeniably selective. This is not the definitive Michael Jackson biography. It is the story of how Michael became Michael, the name, the image, the global event. That choice ultimately defines Fuqua's achievement and his limitation. He captures Jackson as an artist shaped by wounds, someone who converts fear into precision and isolation into spectacle. The recreated performances pulse because Fuqua believes in the transformative force of that talent. Yet the film's reverence repeatedly places boundaries around its curiosity. It wants to bring viewers behind the curtain, but only as far as its chosen mythology permits. Still, every mythology requires a blueprint, and that blueprint came from John Logan's screenplay, where decades of history had to be compressed into one escalating struggle between family loyalty, personal freedom, and impossible ambition. That blueprint belonged to John Logan, a writer unusually comfortable turning famous men into wounded myths. His credits include Gladiator, The Aviator, Hugo, and Skyfall, films built around public figures whose private damage becomes inseparable from their legend. Michael Jackson fits that pattern almost too perfectly. Logan does not construct Michael as a conventional cradle-to-grave biography. He builds an origin story. A gifted child survives his father's discipline, discovers artistic independence, and gradually transforms himself into the most recognizable entertainer on Earth. The approach gives an impossibly crowded life a clean, dramatic spine. It also determines which parts of that life the movie is prepared to confront. The screenplay begins with childhood, because childhood provides the film's emotional vocabulary. Joe Jackson's rehearsals are not merely early career anecdotes. They become the furnace in which Michael's perfectionism is formed. Every later demand for another take, a sharper movement, a bigger production, carries an echo of those rooms. Logan's smartest decision is connecting artistic brilliance to emotional injury without reducing one to the other. Michael does not become extraordinary simply because he suffers. He becomes extraordinary because he learns to convert suffering into control. On stage, every gesture obeys him. Off stage, almost nothing does. That contradiction powers the story more effectively than any parade of hit songs. Once the Jackson 5 reach Motown, however, the script begins moving at biopic speed. Years collapse into rehearsals, contracts, television appearances, and increasingly elaborate performances. Suzanne DePass, Berry Gordy, Quincy Jones, and John Branca enter as figures who recognize a different piece of Michael's potential. Their dramatic function is clear. Each opens another door. Joe sees a family act. Motown sees a young star. Quincy sees an artist. Branca sees an empire. The progression is elegant, perhaps overly elegant, but it allows the audience to watch Michael's identity expand from obedient son to independent creative force. Logan structures that ascent around acts of separation. Michael must separate from childhood, from Motown's limitations, from his brother's collective identity, and finally from Joe's managerial control. The decisive scenes are therefore not always the performances. They are the quieter confrontations surrounding them. Michael asking for authority, Joe treating independence as betrayal, Branca being instructed to remove Joe as manager. The facts terminating Joe's role is almost comically brief, yet dramatically it represents something enormous. Michael cannot defeat his father through physical force. He defeats him through paperwork. A signature accomplishes what years of resistance could not. This gives Michael a strong central conflict, but it also reveals the screenplay's simplifying instinct. Joe becomes the human obstacle against whom nearly every triumph can be measured. When Michael succeeds, he escapes Joe. When he struggles, Joe's voice seems to remain inside him. That is emotionally legible filmmaking, and Coleman Domingo gives the relationship enough complexity to prevent total caricature. Yet a life as culturally, psychologically, and commercially complicated as Jackson's cannot be explained through one father-son wound. Logan's structure makes the movie move. It also makes the man easier to understand than he probably was. The musical sequences operate like dramatic punctuation. I Want You Back establishes natural ability. Off the Wall marks self-definition. Billie Jean and Motown 25 announce cultural domination. Thriller turns ambition into something almost architectural, as though Michael is no longer recording songs but constructing worlds. This is where Logan's screenplay behaves less like a biography and more like a superhero origin film. Each performance unlocks another level of power. The audience already knows the songs, so the suspense cannot come from whether they will succeed. It comes from watching Michael realize how much he can command and how little satisfaction that command ultimately provides. Then the screenplay's real-life development took a sharp turn. The original version reportedly extended into the 1993 allegations and built its final act around that crisis. Producers later discovered that a settlement provision barred the depiction or mention of Jordan Chandler, forcing the filmmakers to remove that material, rewrite the ending, and reunite the cast for 22 days of additional photography. The revised film stops during the bad tour, with Michael still near the height of his power. That change did more than replace an ending. It altered the moral architecture of the entire film. A story that once moved from triumph into accusation now moves from abuse into liberation. The first structure might have forced viewers to hold incompatible versions of Jackson simultaneously: victim, genius, global celebrity, and accused man. The release structure offers a far cleaner emotional destination. Michael escapes his father, commands the stage, and walks toward another roaring crowd. His story continues. The film announces, turning incompleteness into a promise rather than a wound. Lionsgate has since confirmed active progress toward another film, with substantial material from the broader production already available. Does that make the screenplay dishonest? Not automatically. Every biography selects, compresses, and rearranges. Logan's first responsibility is dramatic coherence, not encyclopedic completeness. But selection becomes argument. By ending in 1988, Michael argues that the essential story is the making of the king of pop, not the decades in which that crown became heavier, stranger, and more contested. The result is propulsive, emotional, and often moving. It is also visibly engineered to leave the most difficult questions outside the frame, and yet even the cleanest screenplay remains only potential until actors give it flesh. Logan wrote Michael as prodigy, survivor, brother, employer, and emerging myth. Finding one performer capable of holding all those identities, while recreating movements the world knows frame by frame, became the production's next impossible problem. Casting Michael Jackson required solving a problem that no prosthetic, vocal coach, or choreographer could fix. Audiences already knew every angle of the man. His walk, his speaking rhythm, the tilt of his head, even the silence before a dance move had been studied for decades. A famous actor might have brought confidence, but fame would also create interference. We would see the performer pretending to be Michael. Producer Graham King and casting director Victoria Thomas therefore searched internationally before choosing Jaafar Jackson, Michael's nephew and the son of Jermaine Jackson. The choice looked inevitable after the announcement. Getting there, however, reportedly took a worldwide search. Jaafar was not selected merely because his face carried the Jackson family structure. He could sing, dance, and reproduce movement without making every gesture feel mechanically memorized. More importantly, he understood the family's physical language, the softness of the voice, the guarded posture, the way charm and discomfort could occupy the same expression. Yet the casting involved a staggering risk. Michael became his first major acting role. Fuqua was placing an enormous production on someone who had never carried a feature film. Jaafar spent roughly 2 years in the process before a screen test was shown to the director, according to the film's Berlin cast discussion. That family connection creates both the casting's power and its complication. Jaafar does not approach Michael as distant historical material. He approaches him as an uncle whose voice, reputation, and absence still exist inside his family. That proximity can produce details an outside actor might spend months trying to manufacture. It can also create emotional boundaries. How freely can an actor interrogate someone whose mother is his grandmother and whose siblings are his parents' generation? The film benefits from Jaafar's instinctive tenderness toward Michael, but that tenderness is never neutral. He is playing a cultural icon, a contested public figure, and a relative. 3 responsibilities, 1 performance. Fuqua avoids asking a single actor to carry the entire transformation. Giuliano Cruvaldi plays Michael during the Jackson 5 years, separating childhood from adult mythology. Smart move. Young Michael was not simply a smaller version of the later star. He possessed a different energy, open-faced, explosive, and still visibly delighted by applause. Casting Valdi allows the film to preserve that quality before Jaafar introduces the quieter, increasingly controlled adult persona. The transition between them becomes part of the storytelling. One child performs because music pours out of him. The older Michael performs because the stage has become the only place where he can completely dictate what happens. Around those relatively untested leads, the production builds a protective wall of experienced actors. Coleman Domingo plays Joe Jackson, Nia Long plays Catherine Jackson, Miles Teller portrays attorney and advisor John Branca, and the music industry figures include Lorenz Tate as Berry Gordy, Laura Harrier as Suzanne DePass, and Kendrick Sampson as Quincy Jones. This balance feels deliberate. Jaafar and Valdi supply discovery. The veteran cast supplies stability. When an inexperienced actor enters an emotionally demanding scene, Domingo or Long can control its rhythm without visibly controlling it. They listen, redirect, and create pressure. The scene remains alive, even when the central performer is still finding his footing. Domingo may be the most strategically important selection after Jaafar. Joe Jackson could easily become a one-note monster. The cruel father included solely to generate sympathy for his son. Domingo brings the authority required for that threat, but he also carries intelligence, ambition, and wounded pride. Fuqua discussed Joe with him through the experience of black fathers shaped before the civil rights era. Men who believed survival demanded hardness, and who could confuse protection with domination. That framing does not excuse Joe's behavior. It makes the behavior dramatically dangerous because Joe can view himself as the family's savior while becoming the source of its fear. Nia Long's Catherine is the necessary counterweight. Where Joe represents discipline sharpened into intimidation, Catherine represents emotional shelter constrained by loyalty and circumstance. Casting Long brings immediate warmth, but warmth alone would flatten Catherine into the familiar biopic mother who offers encouragement from the edge of the frame. Long has to communicate affection mixed with helplessness. She recognizes Michael's sensitivity, yet remains inside the structure damaging him. The choice also gives the family scenes contrasting centers of gravity. Domingo tightens the room. Long tries to keep it from breaking. Jaafar stands between them, absorbing both forces. Miles Teller's casting creates a different kind of tension. He plays John Branca, Michael's attorney, and one of the film's most effective institutional allies. The real Branca is also an executor of the Jackson estate and a producer on Michael. That overlap cannot help feeling unusual. Teller gives the character recognizability and movie star confidence. Positioning Branca as someone capable of operating inside rooms, Michael finds emotionally exhausting. But because the real figure participates in the production, every flattering scene carries an extra question. Are we watching characterization, self-interpretation, or reputation management? The casting works dramatically while making the film's authorship impossible to forget. The wider ensemble follows a resemblance plus function philosophy rather than a parade of celebrity cameos. Tate's Gordy embodies corporate charm. Harrier's Suzanne DePass offers intelligence without theatrical intimidation. Sampson's Quincy Jones must suggest creative authority strong enough to challenge Michael rather than merely admire him. Even the actors portraying Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and LaToya have a difficult assignment. They must feel like a family before they feel like historical impersonations. Hair, costumes, and choreography create recognition. Shared irritation, private jokes, and old resentments create siblings. That is the production's most revealing casting choice. Michael surrounds its inexperienced central performer with actors who can define the emotional temperature around him. Then trusts Jaafar to respond from somewhere more personal than technique. Whether that gamble succeeds cannot be judged through resemblance alone. The real test lies in the pauses, the fear beneath the whisper, and the moments when imitation disappears. Because the next question is not who was cast, but what those actors actually do once the camera moves close enough to expose them. Jaafar Jackson's first appearance as the adult Michael carries an almost unfair burden. Before he speaks, the audience is measuring him. Face, posture, hands, voice. Then the music begins, his body snaps into motion, and comparison briefly gives way to recognition. The resemblance is persuasive, but resemblance is not the real achievement. Jaafar understands Michael's strange physical contradiction, fragile in conversation, absolute in performance. Offstage, he folds inward, lowers his voice, and appears to ask permission to occupy space. Under concert lights, the spine straightens and every movement becomes an order. That transformation gives the film its pulse. Critics who rejected the movie's sanitized storytelling still frequently singled out Jaafar's instinctive command of Michael's singing and dancing style. His most difficult task is avoiding the trap of impersonation. Michael Jackson's mannerisms are so recognizable that accuracy can become comedy. The breathy voice, guarded smile, delicate hand movements, and sudden giggles can look like a collection of celebrity impressions. Jaafar survives this by treating those details as defenses rather than decorations. His softness is rarely simple innocence. It is a shield. When Michael senses confrontation, his voice becomes sweeter and his body more contained, as though politeness might stop another person from controlling him. Watch the eyes. They remain alert even when the mouth smiles. Jaafar plays someone who learned early that a room could change temperature without warning. Then he steps on stage. Different human being. The Motown 25 recreation is the performance's defining test because the audience knows exactly what is coming. The black jacket, the fedora, the first backward glide of the moonwalk. There is no narrative surprise available, only the danger of falling short. Jaafar does not dance with the exaggerated effort of an actor proving he trained hard. He lets the movements arrive cleanly, almost casually, preserving Michael's illusion that gravity had agreed to different rules for him. The sequence works because Jaafar captures the rhythm between the famous steps. The waiting, the held pose, the fractional pause before the crowd erupts. Michael's power was never just movement. It was anticipation. Jaafar understands that the stillness controls the room. The vocal performance is more complicated. The film blends archival Michael Jackson recordings with Jaafar's own voice in portions of the musical material, while Jaafar handles the dramatic dialogue and the transition into Michael's distinctive speaking register. He gets the sound remarkably close, but the stronger choice is how the voice evolves. Earlier scenes carry more spontaneity and vocal weight. Later, the tone becomes lighter, more measured, and increasingly constructed. The movie treats Michael's public personality almost like another artistic creation. He did not simply develop a musical style. He designed a way of being seen. Jaafar charts that design without announcing it, gradually replacing ordinary reactions with controlled gestures until the performer and the person become difficult to separate. That is also where the performance encounters the screenplay's boundaries. Jaafar is strongest when allowed to play discomfort, creative hunger, or anger leaking through restraint. He is less convincing when the film asks him to function as a symbol of pure generosity. Those scenes can feel embalmed, partly because the dialogue protects Michael from contradiction. No actor can reveal complexity that the screenplay refuses to write. Still, Jaafar often searches for friction inside the approved portrait. His Michael can be kind and calculating in the same moment. When discussing business or artistic control, the softness remains, but the gaze hardens. The film may present him as a wounded innocent. Jaafar quietly reminds us that this innocent could command studios, lawyers, musicians, and enormous amounts of money. His scenes opposite Coleman Domingo expose that steel. Domingo plays Joe Jackson as a man whose love has been poisoned by ownership. He rarely needs to explode. The threat sits in his stillness, his heavy stare, and the impatient way he listens to Michael's objections as though a son's independence were a personal insult. Domingo's physical authority makes Jaafar appear smaller, but Jaafar resists through delay. He pauses, looks away, swallows words, then speaks anyway. Their confrontations are not balanced battles. They are the slow process of a frightened son, discovering that financial and artistic power can give him the courage emotional security never did. Fuqua and Domingo framed Joe through the worldview of a black father shaped by hardship, seeking explanation without turning cruelty into absolution. The scene surrounding Joe's removal as manager crystallizes Jaafar's approach. Michael does not suddenly become loud or conventionally heroic. His rebellion remains quiet, almost administrative. That restraint matters. A more theatrical performance would have delivered catharsis through shouting. Jaafar makes the victory uncomfortable because the child inside Michael still appears to expect punishment. Control has changed hands, but fear has not disappeared. This is where his lack of conventional acting experience occasionally becomes an advantage. He does not force every beat into a clearly readable emotion. Some reactions remain private. Fuqua recalled reassuring him after takes to remain inside whatever emotional state he had reached rather than polishing it into technique. Giuliano Cruvaldi creates the foundation for all of this as young Michael. His performance is brighter, less guarded, and more openly frightened. During the early family rehearsals, the boy's talent arrives alongside constant vigilance. He wants to sing, but he also needs to avoid disappointing Joe. Valdi captures the cruel confusion of a child, discovering that the thing bringing him joy is also the thing adults use to control him. He does not play young Michael as a miniature icon. He plays a gifted kid whose identity is being built faster than he can understand it. The handoff between Valdi and Jaafar works because the later performance carries remnants of that child. The instinct to please, the fear of criticism, and the belief that flawless performance might purchase safety. Jaafar's work is not flawless. In quieter explanatory scenes, his line delivery can become cautious, and Fuqua sometimes protects him with music, reaction shots, or rapid transitions. But when the film allows behavior rather than dialogue to carry the meaning, he becomes magnetic. His best acting occurs in the half-second after applause stops. The shoulders loosen, the smile vanishes, and the superstar seems to retreat somewhere unreachable. That tiny collapse tells us more than pages of biopic dialogue. On stage, Michael owns everyone. Off stage, he cannot fully own himself. That distinction elevates Jaafar beyond stunt casting. He gives the film what its authorized narrative often lacks: unease. His resemblance invites the audience into the fantasy, but his nervousness keeps the fantasy from feeling entirely comfortable. Still, Michael Jackson's rise was never a solo act. Around Jaafar stand parents, brothers, executives, mentors, and advisors, performers who must create an entire emotional ecosystem while the central figure absorbs nearly every spotlight. Their contribution is quieter, but without it, even this uncanny transformation would have nothing solid to push against. Jaafar Jackson may occupy the center of the frame, but Coleman Domingo controls its emotional weather. The moment Joe Jackson enters a room, shoulders stiffen and conversations shrink. Domingo does not play him as constantly explosive. That would be easier, louder, and less frightening. He makes Joe economical. A stare replaces a threat. A clipped instruction lands like punishment. Even moments of approval carry ownership, as though his children's talent proves the correctness of every cruelty used to cultivate it. The performance gives Michael the antagonist its streamlined narrative needs, but Domingo pushes beyond function. Joe is not merely blocking Michael's freedom. He believes he manufactured the person demanding it. That belief makes the family scenes crackle. Joe watches the Jackson 5 less like a proud father than a factory owner inspecting production. Success does not soften him because success validates his methods. Domingo's physicality does much of the work. The planted stance, the forward lean, the refusal to surrender space. Yet he allows flashes of wounded pride when Michael begins making decisions without him. Suddenly the tyrant looks threatened. Not redeemed, threatened. That distinction matters. The film may explain Joe through poverty, racism, and his determination to protect the family from limited opportunities, but Domingo never asks us to confuse explanation with forgiveness. He shows how a survival instinct can rot into domination. Nia Long works at the opposite frequency as Katherine Jackson. Joe expands until everyone else disappears. Katherine survives by making herself emotionally available without openly challenging the structure controlling the household. Long's performance is built from containment. She listens to Michael with tenderness, watches Joe with apprehension, and repeatedly carries the pain of recognizing what she cannot or will not stop. Some critics found Katherine underwritten, and they are right. The screenplay too often reduces her to sorrowful reaction shots. Long, nevertheless, finds conflict inside the silence. Catherine loves her son. She also remains loyal to the family system hurting him. The contradiction sits in her face even when the dialogue refuses to name it. Together, Domingo and Long create the two emotional forces shaping Michael. Joe teaches him that affection must be earned through perfection. Catherine offers affection, but not rescue. That combination helps explain why the adult Michael presented here craves approval, while distrusting nearly everyone who gives it. Jaafar becomes softer around Long, almost physically younger, while scenes with Domingo pull his body inward. The chemistry is not based on warmth or playful improvisation. It is based on pressure. Each performer changes the apparent age of Michael standing between them, making the superstar look like a powerful employer in one scene and a frightened child in the next. The actors playing the Jackson brothers face a less rewarding assignment. Joseph David Jones appears as Jackie, Ryan Hill as Tito, Jamal R. Henderson as Jermaine, and Trey Horton as Marlon, with younger performers embodying the siblings during the Jackson 5 years. Their choreography and shared stage presence establish the group as a unit, but the screenplay rarely grants the adult brothers independent interior lives. Jermaine receives the clearest tension because Michael's solo ascent changes the family balance, yet even that conflict arrives in compressed form. The brothers often function as witnesses to Michael's transformation rather than participants in their own complicated history. A sharper ensemble drama would have let admiration, jealousy, loyalty, and financial dependence collide more violently. Jessica Sula's LaToya and the other family members encounter the same limitation. They help make Havenhurst feel populated, but population is not the same as characterization. The movie is so committed to isolating Michael that it sometimes flattens the very people from whom he is supposedly becoming isolated. That is a missed opportunity. Siblings remember versions of us that fame cannot erase. Letting Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and LaToya challenge Michael's self-mythology would have created friction no executive or journalist could provide. Instead, they drift toward the edge as the spotlight tightens. The absence of meaningful space for Janet and Rebby further emphasizes how selectively the film constructs the Jackson family. Outside the family, the ensemble becomes a procession of professional gateways. Lawrence Tate gives Berry Gordy polished authority, Laura Harrier brings composed intelligence to Suzanne DePass, and Kendrick Sampson plays Quincy Jones as someone capable of recognizing Michael's potential without appearing overwhelmed by it. Sampson's Quincy should be one of the film's richest relationships. Producer and artist pushing each other toward off-the-wall and thriller. Instead, the accelerated timeline leaves much of that chemistry implied. He supplies credibility, warmth, and creative confidence, but the screenplay gives him too little room to demonstrate how collaboration became transformation. Miles Teller receives considerably more space as attorney John Branca. His brisk, pragmatic energy cuts through the Jackson household's emotional fog. Branca speaks the language of contracts, ownership, and leverage, the tools Michael eventually uses to separate himself from Joe. Teller plays him as reassuringly competent, occasionally amused, and always ready to turn artistic ambition into institutional power. Yet the prominence carries an unavoidable complication. The real Branca is an executor of Jackson's estate and a producer on the film. That does not invalidate Teller's performance, but it makes the character's heroic usefulness feel unusually curated. The film criticizes one manager while flattering another. Kylan Durrell Jones makes a quieter impression as bodyguard Bill Bray, offering Michael something rare: protective masculinity without intimidation. Their exchanged looks and understated warmth suggest trust built outside the film's major speeches. The relationship also demonstrates what the ensemble does best. These supporting performers give shape to the forces surrounding Michael: fear from Joe, comfort from Catherine, commercial strategy from Branca, creative validation from Quincy, and security from Bray. Some characters remain sketches, but together they form the gravitational field against which Jaafar's Michael moves, and that field extends beyond performance. The actors become convincing historical figures because every room, costume, microphone, and carefully recreated stage gives them physical history to inhabit. Behind the ensemble stands another cast entirely. The designers who rebuilt Motown, Havenhurst and Michael's expanding imagination one deliberate object at a time. Barbara Ling's production design faces a peculiar challenge. Much of Michael Jackson's world already exists in the audience's memory. We know the cramped family rehearsals, Motown's polished machinery, Havenhurst's gates, the Motown 25 stage, and the rain-slicked street of Thriller. Recreating those places too loosely would feel false. Recreating them too perfectly could feel lifeless. A wax museum with better lighting. Ling's solution is to let the environments evolve with Michael. Early spaces feel crowded and functional, built around family necessity. Later rooms become larger, cleaner, and more controlled. Success gives Michael space. It does not give him comfort. Ling served as production designer, working alongside costume designer Marcy Rogers to construct the film's shifting historical world. The Jackson home is where that visual strategy begins. Furniture, bodies, and musical equipment compete for limited room, turning domestic space into an unofficial training facility. Nothing feels entirely private because the family's career has consumed the family's life. The rehearsal areas are especially effective. Instruments, cables, and children are packed together beneath Joe's supervision. These are not glamorous origin story spaces. They feel practical, pressured, and faintly airless. Every object seems arranged around work. Michael's childhood therefore appears visually crowded before the screenplay ever explains why he later becomes obsessed with building environments he can control. Havenhurst changes that scale without eliminating the tension. Fuqua secured access to the real Jackson family compound in Encino, allowing the production to film inside a place carrying genuine family history. Jaafar had also rehearsed there and described using his memories of the house, down to familiar rooms, furniture, and family associations, to deepen his performance. That authenticity produces something a constructed set might not: emotional unevenness. Havenhurst looks like success, but it still operates as Joe's territory. The house is larger than the family's earlier surroundings, yet Michael can appear just as confined inside it. Wealth has expanded the walls without changing who holds authority. The performance environments tell the opposite story. Stages are the only places where increasing scale genuinely liberates Michael. Curtains open wider. Lighting rigs grow more elaborate. Audiences multiply until individual faces become a roaring mass. Production design turns career progression into architecture. The Jackson 5 begin inside tightly framed television and club spaces, while the adult Michael eventually commands platforms built to magnify every gesture. Fuqua used the Pasadena Civic Auditorium for the Motown 25 recreation and studied the original broadcast camera positions and visual structure. The result has the strange charge of collective memory being physically rebuilt. The location is not simply background. It is part of the performance's historical identity. Thriller represents the design team's most elaborate act of resurrection. The production returned to Union Pacific Avenue, where the original short film had been shot, and filmed through 2 nights beneath a full moon. Storefronts, street textures, dancers, and practical atmosphere reassemble the 1983 production from the inside, allowing Michael to show not only the finished choreography but the machinery surrounding it. Even the crew member portraying director John Landis becomes part of the illusion. Fuqua does not treat Thriller as a fantasy interrupting the biography. He presents its construction as evidence of Michael's imagination becoming industrial, an idea large enough to require dancers, cranes, designers, technicians, and an entire street. Makeup designer Bill Corso carries that reconstruction directly onto human faces. Rather than invent a generalized army of zombies, Corso and co-prosthetic designer Christiane Tinsley studied restored footage and captured images of individual dancers, attempting to reproduce the original ghoul designs and body types. Corso even consulted original makeup creator Rick Baker. Modern silicone appliances proved unreliable during Jaffar's intense dancing because sweat caused them to break down, so Corso returned to old-fashioned foam rubber and grease paint, the kind of practical solution that suits a film obsessed with historical texture. The makeup does not merely reference Thriller. It recreates the labor and limitations through which Thriller was originally made. Marcy Rogers approaches the costumes with the same forensic energy. She assembled approximately 800 pages of research, using photographs, magazines, and period references to track the Jackson family's changing economic status, geography, and public image. When direct visual evidence from the family's earliest years was unavailable, she worked from historically appropriate silhouettes, rather than inventing flashy outfits that would announce future fame too early. The distinction is crucial. Young Michael must first look like a talented child from Gary, Indiana, not a miniature king of pop waiting for his crown. Rogers lets the clothes discover spectacle at roughly the same speed Michael does. Her family costumes quietly extend the character work. Joe is dressed in controlled, darker tailoring and athletic wear, reinforcing the sense of a man who maintains his own uniform. Catherine receives softer colors and smaller prints, allowing warmth to enter scenes that Joe visually dominates. During the confrontation over Joe's dismissal as manager, Rogers places Catherine in white against his darker anger. It is simple color theory, but it changes the emotional composition of the room. Catherine becomes a fragile patch of calm separating father and son. Even the Jackson brothers' trousers required altered gussets, so the period silhouettes would survive choreography. Historical accuracy had to move. The iconic outfits demanded another level of scrutiny. Rogers examined the original red Thriller costume at the Grammy Museum, measuring proportions through the display glass and consulting original co-designer Deborah Nadoolman Landis about dyeing white jeans to match the jacket. For Motown 25, the black sequined jacket, rhinestone shirt, glove, and glittering socks were custom-built from carefully sourced materials. Fuqua said recreated garments were placed beside Michael's originals for comparison. The Grammy jacket alone weighed roughly 15 pounds, and the trophies held by Jaafar were Michael's actual Grammys. Across principal and additional photography, the costume department delivered more than 3,000 costumes. That precision occasionally creates a weakness. The film can become so devoted to recognition that design risks serving memory before drama. A jacket enters and the audience applauds the jacket. A familiar set appears, and the pleasure comes from comparison. Yet the strongest visual choices move beyond duplication. Michael's costumes gradually become armor, sharper shoulders, reflective surfaces, buckles, military lines, and materials designed to catch every available light. The shy man disappears inside an image engineered to be visible from the back of an arena. Rogers does not merely chart changing fashion. She charts the construction of a silhouette capable of surviving fame. And a silhouette only becomes mythic when the camera decides how we see it. These sets, fabrics, and practical recreations supplied the physical world. Cinematographer Dion Beebe had to transform that world into moving memory, shifting between family intimacy, period texture, and the overwhelming scale of Michael Jackson in concert. Dion Beebe's cinematography understands that Michael Jackson existed in two radically different visual worlds. In private, he was watched. On stage, he controlled the watching. Beebe builds the film around that reversal. Family scenes often make Michael appear enclosed by doorways, furniture, relatives, and authority figures. Performance scenes give his body the power to reorganize the entire frame. The contrast is not subtle, but subtlety would almost betray the subject. Michael's concerts were designed to overwhelm. His private life, as presented here, was defined by compression. Beebe's job is to move between those extremes without making the film feel like a modest domestic drama interrupted by expensive music videos. Beebe was an inspired choice because his career resists a single visual signature. He helped turn Chicago into moving stage light, pushed early digital night photography on Collateral, created tactile period elegance in Memoirs of a Geisha, and later handled the heavily engineered fantasy of The Little Mermaid. He adapts rather than stamps every project with the same look. For Michael, he described the challenge as lifting the veil on the person, while still embracing the music-driven spectacle. That tension becomes the camera's governing principle. Worship the performer, then search the resulting image for evidence of the man trapped inside it. The early family material is deliberately less mythic. Frames are busier, light feels more practical, and the camera remains attentive to who holds power inside the room. Joe does not need to occupy the center to dominate a composition. Michael's awareness of him is enough. A rehearsal can therefore contain two performances at once: the song Michael is singing and the emotional calculation happening underneath it. Bibi frequently lets bodies interrupt one another, visually reinforcing the lack of privacy within the Jackson household. Young Michael is talented, but the image does not yet belong to him. He is still one element inside Joe's arrangement. As the career expands, the camera's relationship with Michael changes. Longer lenses begin isolating him from surrounding space, creating the sensation that the world is falling away while the icon comes sharply forward. Fuqua said the production discussed period lighting, vintage-style flares, and optical choices that would carry audiences through changing decades. Although most of the movie was captured digitally, selected material was photographed on 16mm and 35mm film. The result is not a rigid history lesson where every decade receives an obvious filter. Texture shifts more quietly. Grain, flare, contrast, and lighting architecture help familiar imagery feel remembered rather than merely reproduced. The concert sequences demanded an entirely different system. 4 touring eras were recreated on a single soundstage at Sony Pictures Studios, meaning Bibi and his crew had to transform one physical platform into several distinct chapters of performance history. They used Unreal Engine to pre-visualize the lighting before construction, then transferred that information into the lighting console. The rig took 6 weeks to build. More than 500 tungsten par cans were combined with disguised modern fixtures, replica gel frames, and period-style housings, so equipment visible behind Jaafar would belong to the correct era. Technology remained contemporary behind the curtain. The image had to appear historically convincing in front of it. That labor pays off because the concerts do not all look interchangeable. Earlier appearances retain the clean, somewhat contained geometry of televised performance. By the bad tour, light has become architecture. Beams carve through haze. Darkness swallows the edges of the stadium, and Michael appears less like a singer standing on a platform than the source powering the entire machine. This is where Fuqua's action instincts become useful. Entrances have impact. Poses land like blows. Camera movement responds to choreography rather than decorating it. The body initiates the shot, and the frame races to contain the consequence. Bibi also used ingenue zoom lenses, including the full-frame Optimo Ultra 12X and the more compact Easy 1 and Easy 2. That may sound like dry equipment trivia, but it explains part of the concert photography's responsiveness. A long-range zoom allows the camera to move from the scale of the event toward a tighter emotional detail without physically invading the stage. One moment Michael belongs to thousands of people. The next, the frame catches a glance or breath that appears almost private. The technique mirrors celebrity itself. Distance creates the icon. Magnification searches for the human being. Fuqua's decision to add cameras during the concert filming strengthens that dual perspective. He noticed individual extras crying, dancing, and reacting, and wanted those spontaneous responses captured rather than treating the crowd as anonymous visual texture. Those shots matter because Michael Jackson's impact cannot be communicated through choreography alone. The audience completes the performance. A raised hand means little without the stadium answering it. By cutting between Jaafar's controlled precision and Face's losing control, the film visualizes an exchange of power. He commands them, yet their adoration is also constructing the version of Michael from which the private man can no longer escape. The cinematography is less successful when reverence overtakes inquiry. Familiar images occasionally receive such polished treatment that the camera seems afraid to disturb them. Recognition replaces discovery. We are shown the pose we expect, at the angle memory has already approved. Yet Bibi repeatedly finds small ruptures in that museum-like perfection. The smile fading after applause, Michael disappearing behind foreground figures, the lonely face surrounded by machinery built to amplify him. Those moments carry the film's sharpest visual idea. Fame gives Michael absolute visibility while making genuine access nearly impossible. What the camera enlarges, the soundtrack must make physical. The stadium lights create scale. But scale means nothing unless the bass hits the chest. The crowd becomes a living force, and silence exposes the person left behind after the music stops. That is where the film's next layer takes over. Not simply Michael Jackson's songs, but the carefully engineered world of noise, rhythm, and absence surrounding them. Michael Jackson's music creates a problem most biopics would kill to have. The songs are already dramatic. The opening bass of Billie Jean, the breath before Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, the synthetic growl of Thriller. These sounds carry decades of memory before the film adds a single image. Michael therefore cannot use the catalog as ordinary background music. Every track arrives with its own history, choreography, and emotional expectations. The filmmaker's task was not to convince us the songs were powerful. It was to make familiar recordings feel physically present again, as though the audience were hearing them at the moment of discovery rather than through 40 years of cultural repetition. Music supervisor John Warhurst manages that inheritance while composer Leor Rosner supplies the original underscore. Rosner's position is almost deliberately invisible. He cannot compete with Michael Jackson without losing. Instead, the score operates in the spaces where the hits cannot naturally go: childhood fear, family tension, professional uncertainty, and the lonely seconds after performance. Rosner's music supports the emotional argument that the screenplay sometimes states too plainly, connecting the frightened boy in Gary to the adult artist building an identity out of rhythm and control. The underscore was produced by Rosner with editor John Ottman, another sign of how closely music and picture were shaped together. The strongest musical transitions do not begin with a triumphant full-volume recording. They begin with fragments, a rhythm tapped against furniture, a melodic phrase repeated in rehearsal, a breath, a count-in, a voice searching for the correct placement. Then the arrangement expands. Instruments lock together, the frame opens, and private experimentation becomes public history. This process gives the song's narrative function. Off the Wall is not merely included because audiences love it. The music represents Michael separating his artistic instincts from the family machinery. Billie Jean marks the moment those instincts become global authority. Thriller sounds like ambition growing too large to remain inside a recording studio. The vocal construction adds another layer of illusion. Jaafar Jackson and Giuliano Cruz-Valdi sang during filming, while the finished musical sequences combine their performances with Michael Jackson's original recordings. The balance changes according to the scene. Intimate studio or unaccompanied moments allow more of the actors' voices and breathing to register, while iconic performances lean toward the master's audiences immediately recognize. Jaafar explained publicly that he sang live during production, and reporting after release confirmed that the sound team blended those vocals with archival material rather than treating the actor as a silent body beneath playback. That decision is technically effective and dramatically complicated. Hearing Michael's original voice gives the performances an undeniable charge. The instant that voice cuts through the speakers, the recreation gains an authority no impersonator could fully supply. But the voice also belongs to a real person while the body belongs to an actor. The film asks us to accept the fusion as one continuous presence. Usually it works. Jaafar's breathing, neck tension, and physical phrasing align closely enough with the recording that the seam disappears. Yet the very perfection of the blend can make the concert scenes feel less like acting than resurrection, a sensation thrilling in the moment and faintly unsettling afterward. Paul Massey's music mix is crucial to maintaining that illusion. Fuqua specifically brought up Massey's experience mixing Michael Jackson's This Is It, which gave him familiarity with presenting Jackson's music at theatrical scale. The mix does not simply turn the catalog louder. It creates layers. Lead vocal locked at the center, percussion spreading across the room, audience noise rising around the edges, footwork and clothing movement cutting through without weakening the song. The result makes the performances feel embodied. You hear not only the record but the labor beneath it. The inhale before a phrase, the shoe striking the stage, the crowd reacting half a second before the next musical hit. Crowd sound may be the film's most important sonic effect. A Michael Jackson performance without screaming would feel historically dishonest, but undifferentiated screaming quickly becomes noise. The mix shapes the audience like a musical instrument. Individual cries appear close, then dissolve into a massive collective roar. Sometimes the crowd anticipates Michael. Sometimes it answers him. During Motown 25, the first eruption after the moonwalk functions almost like an additional percussion track. That reaction tells us what the choreography means culturally. The step itself is elegant. The sound of thousands realizing they have seen something new turns elegance into history. Silence does the opposite. After the concert sequences, the soundtrack often withdraws instead of carrying the excitement into the next scene. The music stops. The crowd vanishes. A room tone, distant movement, or Michael's breathing remains. Those drop-offs create the film's sharpest emotional contrasts. On stage, sound confirms that he matters to everyone. In private, silence asks whether anyone knows him. Rosner's underscore occasionally enters to soften that emptiness, but the most revealing moments need very little composition. The absence of applause becomes its own theme. There are times when the soundtrack overwhelms the drama. The songs are so potent that emotional complexity can be swept away by recognition. A difficult scene ends, a famous bass line begins, and discomfort turns into celebration before it has fully settled. That is partly the structure's weakness and partly the catalog's irresistible force. Michael wants to investigate the cost of becoming an icon, yet it repeatedly uses the icon's music to make us surrender to him. The contradiction is not accidental. It is the movie's entire experience. Sony Music released a companion album alongside the film, confirming how fully the production was designed as both biography and renewed encounter with the catalog. But sound in Michael does more than sell remembrance. It creates the gap between the man and the phenomenon. We hear Michael searching quietly, then hear the world answer at impossible volume. And building that illusion required more than musicians and mixers. It demanded immense practical coordination. Crowds, rehearsals, locations, reshoots, and technical problems that turned the production itself into a performance under pressure. The illusion of effortlessness began with a brutal test. On the first day of filming, Antoine Fuqua placed Jaafar Jackson on stage to perform Bad before roughly 500 to 600 screaming extras. No gentle introduction. No quiet dialogue scene to ease a first-time feature actor into production. Fuqua wanted to know whether Jaafar could carry the image around which the entire movie had been financed. The sequence lasted several shooting days, requiring him to reproduce the same intensity from multiple angles while the crowd maintained concert-level excitement. It was less an opening scene than a pressure test. If Jaafar disappeared beneath the costume, the production had no movie. Instead, Fuqua saw the character lock into place. That decision captures Fuqua's on-set philosophy. He works through momentum, physical action, and emotional reassurance rather than endless intellectual explanation. Jaafar had never led a film, so technical perfection alone would not protect him. Fuqua sometimes approached after a take and encouraged him to remain inside whatever emotional state he had reached. The director's challenge was unusual. Guide an inexperienced actor through a huge studio production without polishing away the familial instinct that made the casting valuable. Too little control, and the performance could collapse into imitation. Too much control, and the spontaneous qualities connected to Michael would disappear. Jaafar needed structure around him, but freedom inside it. Los Angeles became more than a convenient production base. Fuqua wanted the city's physical history and the craftspeople who had worked within Michael Jackson's world. The production gained access to Havenhurst, the Jackson family compound, as well as Los Angeles studios associated with Off the Wall. Motown 25 was recreated at a Pasadena venue, while Thriller returned to the street where the original short film had been made. Fuqua described feeling history inside these places, and that sensation matters. A replica can reproduce dimensions. It cannot reproduce the emotional awkwardness of an actor playing his uncle inside a house filled with actual family memory. Original locations did not eliminate logistical difficulty. They concentrated it. The Thriller recreation was filmed at night, beneath full moons that Fuqua remembered as almost unnervingly perfect. The production rebuilt the short film's environment in enough detail to include a performer representing director John Landis. That minor role produced one of the shoot's happy accidents. The selected extra was frightened by the height of the Chapman camera crane, so Fuqua noticed an assistant director nearby whose cigarette, posture, and distinctly 80s appearance resembled Landis. The crew member was dressed for the role and inserted into the sequence. Tiny improvisation, perfectly practical. Suddenly, a production problem became another layer of authenticity. Fuqua also recruited people carrying direct knowledge of Jackson's work. Choreographers Rich and Tone Talawega trained Jaafar daily, musicians and former collaborators visited, and bassist Don Boyette, who toured with Jackson, joined the production's wider circle of advisors and performers. Re-recording mixer Paul Massey brought experience from Michael Jackson's This Is It. Fuqua said some craftspeople even came out of retirement. Their presence created a living reference library, but it also increased the pressure. Fans would examine every hand position, bass tone, and costume seam. Authenticity was not an abstract artistic goal here. It was a defensive strategy against an audience capable of detecting a wrong detail within seconds. The concert scenes demanded industrial coordination. Hundreds of extras had to behave like emotionally overwhelmed fans rather than background performers waiting for instructions. Fuqua began adding cameras after noticing individual reactions. Someone crying, someone dancing, another person visibly stunned by Jaafar's performance. Capturing those unscripted responses gave the recreated concerts a charge that visual effects could not manufacture. The extras were responding simultaneously to Jaafar, to Michael's music, and to their own memories of the real performer. That overlap blurred acting and spectatorship. The production was staging a historical concert, but the crowd was also participating in a present-day tribute. Their emotion became usable footage. Behind that apparent spontaneity sat enormous technical preparation. 4 concert eras were constructed on one Sony soundstage, with cinematographer Dion Beebe's team using virtual pre-visualization to plan the changing lighting systems. The same physical space had to become several stages separated by years of technological and stylistic evolution. Modern equipment was concealed inside period-appropriate housings so the cameras could look toward the rig without exposing the illusion. This is the kind of production work audiences are not supposed to notice. Weeks of design vanish into a few minutes of screen time, and success is measured by how completely viewers believe Michael has stepped into another arena. Principal production wrapped in May 2024, but the movie that reached theaters was far from finished. Its initial cut was lengthy, and discussions emerged about whether the material should be divided. More seriously, the original third act dramatized the 1993 allegations against Jackson. The estate's attorneys later identified a settlement clause barring the depiction or mention of Jordan Chandler in a movie, making a major portion of the planned narrative unusable. John Logan's home was also damaged during the Palisades fire, further complicating the rewriting process. The production did not need cosmetic reshoots. It needed a different destination. In June 2025, the cast reunited for 22 days of additional photography. The filmmakers shot a replacement third act and expanded earlier materials so the revised film could operate as a complete rise-to-fame story. Because the restarted Los Angeles production did not qualify for California tax rebates, the additional work reportedly added between $10 and $15 million to a project originally greenlit at approximately $155 million. Variety reported that the Jackson estate covered the added expense because its oversight caused the restructuring. The release moved from April 18, 2025, first to October, and eventually to April 24, 2026. One legal discovery changed the edit, the budget, the schedule, and the meaning of the film. The new ending leaves Michael preparing to perform during the Bad Tour, still triumphant and publicly untarnished. That is not simply a scene replacement. It transforms the production's entire emotional trajectory. Material designed to move from success into accusation was reshaped into a story of escape from Joe Jackson and arrival at creative independence. Roughly 30% of the discarded footage could potentially be reused in later films. but its future remains dependent on legal and creative decisions that the first production could not solve. What survived is therefore a movie born twice, first as a sweeping life story, then as the celebratory opening movement of something unfinished. That turbulent journey makes the polished final product almost deceptive. The synchronized dancing, exact costumes, and roaring crowds suggest complete control, while behind them sits a production repeatedly forced to adapt by locations, physical performance, audience expectation, and a legal problem capable of erasing an entire act. Whether the financial gamble justified that struggle is the next question. Because after years of development, delayed release dates, and millions spent rebuilding the ending, Michael finally faced the only audience whose verdict could determine its future: the worldwide box office. Before release, Michael looked like the kind of movie that could become either a global event or an extremely expensive cautionary tale. The production had expanded toward nearly $200 million after rewrites and additional photography, making it one of the costliest music biographies ever attempted. That figure changed the commercial equation. A respectable opening would not be enough. Lionsgate, Universal, and the Jackson estate needed audiences far beyond devoted Michael Jackson fans. Families, younger viewers, international moviegoers, and people drawn by the promise of seeing those performances reconstructed at theatrical scale. The film did not merely meet that demand. It arrived like a stadium tour. Its North American opening reached $97 million, while 82 international markets contributed approximately $120.4 million. The worldwide launch totaled $217 million, far above pre-release projections of roughly $75 million domestically and $150 million globally. That established the biggest worldwide opening ever recorded for a musical biopic, crushing the previous $122 million benchmark set by Bohemian Rhapsody. It also gave Michael the second-largest global debut of 2026 at that point, behind the Super Mario Galaxy movie. Critics could debate the film's selectivity. Ticket buyers responded to something simpler and more powerful. Michael Jackson still felt like an event. The $97 million domestic start was impressive. The hold was more important. Movies built around enormous fan bases often collapse after opening weekend because the most committed viewers arrive immediately. Michael fell only 44% in its second weekend, earning another $54 million despite being displaced by The Devil Wears Prada 2. That decline suggested the film was moving beyond opening weekend devotion. Repeat viewing, family attendance, and audiences attracted by word of mouth were sustaining it. Later in the run, the film climbed back to number one during its fourth weekend, an unusual reversal that made its success feel less like a front-loaded celebration and more like an extended cultural moment. The domestic total eventually climbed beyond $365 million. Against a $97 million opening, that represents a multiplier of roughly 3. 8? A muscular result for a heavily anticipated film whose core audience had every reason to rush out immediately. The fifth weekend alone produced more than $20 million across the standard 3-day frame, pushing the domestic cumulative total past $314 million before the run had even reached its later stages. Michael did not simply explode. It endured. That distinction matters because longevity is where theatrical profitability grows. Fewer emergency marketing pushes, continued premium format revenue, and more evidence that viewers are recommending the film rather than merely consuming it. Internationally, the numbers became even more revealing. Current tracking places the worldwide gross at roughly $935 million to $938 million, with approximately $365 million coming from North America and more than $570 million from overseas territories. In other words, around 61% of the film's theatrical business came from outside the domestic market. The United Kingdom alone approached $70 million, while France, Mexico, Brazil, Italy, and other territories showed that Jackson's cultural reach was not confined to one generation or one language. Japan arrived later in the release pattern, giving the film another important market after it had already built extraordinary momentum. That global split is the real commercial story. Hollywood did not spend nearly $200 million because Michael Jackson remained famous in America. It spent that money because his image, choreography, and catalog operate like an international franchise. Audiences who may interpret his life differently can still recognize the moonwalk within a second. The film turns that universal visual language into box office power. A superhero film sells a costume and mythology. Michael sells a silhouette, a bass line, and the collective memory of crowds screaming. Commercially, the distinction barely matters. Both are forms of intellectual property, except Jackson's was built through recorded performance rather than comic books. By June 2026, Michael ranked as the second highest grossing worldwide release of the year, behind the Super Mario Galaxy movie, and had moved beyond the lifetime global total of Bohemian Rhapsody. That makes it the highest grossing musical biopic yet released, at least in unadjusted theatrical dollars. The comparison is striking because Bohemian Rhapsody had long represented the ideal financial model for the genre. Recognizable songs, a charismatic recreation, and broad emotional accessibility. Michael applies the same principles on a larger scale, with a far higher budget, more elaborate performance reconstruction, and an even more internationally recognizable central figure. Box office gross is not the same as profit. Theaters retain a portion of ticket revenue, while marketing, distribution, back-end agreements, and the expensive reshoots complicate any clean calculation. Exact net earnings have not been publicly disclosed. Still, a theatrical total approaching $1 billion transforms the conversation. The film no longer needs to justify its existence as a risky prestige biography. It has become a commercial foundation. A continuation covering Michael's later life now carries something the first production could only hope for. Proof that audiences will show up worldwide, even when reviewers are divided and the subject remains fiercely contested. And that division is where the money becomes culturally fascinating. Michael succeeded not because audiences agreed on Michael Jackson, but because millions still wanted to encounter him. Some arrived for nostalgia, some for Jaafar's performance. Others came ready to challenge the film's omissions. The box office records the size of that curiosity, not its moral meaning. To understand what the film actually became in public conversation, we have to move beyond ticket sales and examine the collision between critics, fans, controversy, and a legacy that refuses to settle into one interpretation. The most revealing number attached to Michael is not its box office. It is the 59-point gulf between critics and verified audiences on Rotten Tomatoes. As of June 2026, the film holds a 38% tomatometer score from 294 reviews and a 97% popcorn meter score from more than 25,000 verified ratings. Metacritic tells the same story in colder numbers, a 39 out of 100 from critics against a 7.9 user score. IMDb is less ecstatic but still more favorable than the professional consensus, sitting around 6.7 from roughly 41,000 ratings. Critics and audiences did not merely disagree. They appeared to be judging different movies. Critics largely approached Michael as biography. On that level, the verdict was harsh. Review after review attacked the screenplay's selectivity, its tendency to turn complicated relationships into inspirational milestones, and its refusal to let Michael become morally or psychologically difficult. Rotten Tomatoes summarized the film as a greatest hits collection lacking the explanatory detail needed to understand its subject. Metacritic's breakdown was equally punishing. Only 20% of its sampled reviews were positive, while the remainder were mixed or negative. The recurring complaint was not that the music failed. It was that the music kept rescuing a drama unwilling to risk genuine discomfort. Even many negative reviews agreed on one point: Jaafar Jackson works. Owen Gleiberman at Variety praised the way he captures both Michael's delicacy and underlying steel, while other critics highlighted his ability to reproduce the voice, physical angles, and explosive stage movement without reducing the performance to parody. Coleman Domingo also received substantial praise, though opinions split over whether his Joe Jackson was layered or too obviously positioned as the story's villain. That disagreement says something about the screenplay. Domingo brings contradiction. The structure keeps pulling him toward function. Jaafar brings unease. The film repeatedly surrounds him with reassurance. The actors search for rough edges inside a portrait designed to remain smooth. The musical sequences received warmer treatment. Reviewers who disliked the movie's dramatic choices still acknowledged the theatrical force of Billie Jean, Motown 25, and the bad tour material. Dion Beebe's concert photography, Jaafar's movement, and the sheer power of Jackson's recordings create stretches where criticism becomes almost irrelevant. Your body responds before your judgment catches up. That is the film's commercial genius. Fuqua does not need every viewer to accept the biography. He only needs the baseline to hit, the hat to tilt, and the moonwalk to release 40 years of memory. For several minutes at a time, Michael stops being a contested history and becomes a communal concert. Audiences openly embraced that experience. Reports from early screenings described viewers arriving in Jackson-inspired clothing, returning for multiple showings, and dancing in theater aisles. At one New York screening, fans reacted vocally to Giuliano Valdi's young Michael singing and Jaafar's adult transformation, treating familiar performances less like scenes than live appearances. That behavior explains why the audience score cannot simply be dismissed as fans ignoring quality. Many viewers were measuring success through emotional recognition. Did the movie restore the excitement they associated with Jackson? Did Jaafar make the stage sequences feel alive? Did the music sound enormous in a theater? On those terms, the film delivers exactly what it promises. But emotional satisfaction does not erase the ethical arguments surrounding the film. Leaving Neverland director Dan Reed condemned Michael for creating a protective version of Jackson while avoiding the sexual abuse allegations that dominate any modern assessment of his legacy. Because the story ends in 1988, the filmmakers can claim that those accusations fall outside the chosen timeline. Technically true, dramatically convenient. The film still portrays Jackson's fascination with childhood and children as evidence of damaged innocence, meaning it indirectly interprets later controversies while declining to acknowledge them. Absence becomes argument. What the movie refuses to discuss shapes its meaning as strongly as anything it includes. The criticism became harder to dismiss as ordinary anti-Jackson hostility because it also came from inside his family. Paris Jackson said she had no involvement beyond reading an early screenplay draft and offering notes about material she considered dishonest. After those concerns were not addressed, she distanced herself from the project and described it as the kind of controlled, sugar-coated Hollywood narrative likely to please a particular portion of her father's fandom. Her comments complicate the production's image as a unified family account. The estate supported the film. Michael's nephew stars in it. Katherine Jackson endorsed the project. Yet Michael's daughter publicly rejected the idea that this authorized version should automatically be treated as intimate truth. That conflict pushed Michael into a wider debate about the modern music biopic. Films such as Bohemian Rhapsody demonstrated that factual compression, familiar emotional beats, and accurately recreated performances can generate huge audience enthusiasm even when critics object to simplification. Michael takes that formula to its logical extreme. The estate's cooperation provides the songs, costumes, and personal access that make the spectacle persuasive. The same cooperation creates suspicion that difficult material has been filtered through reputation management. The film's success, therefore, raises an uncomfortable industry question. When fans primarily want to relive the music, how much truth can a blockbuster afford before celebration turns into confrontation? Awards season has not yet delivered a final institutional verdict, but the likely areas of recognition are already obvious. Jaafar Jackson's physical transformation, Marcy Rogers' costumes, the sound work, and the large-scale concert recreation. A serious screenplay campaign would face a steeper climb given the critical scores and controversy around the film's omissions. Yet awards may be almost beside the point. Michael has already become something more culturally revealing than a universally admired film. It is a mirror. Fans see restoration, critics see evasion, skeptics see corporate mythology, and younger viewers may see their first full encounter with Jackson's power as a performer. That divided response is not noise surrounding the movie. It is the movie's real legacy beginning to form. Michael succeeds spectacularly as remembrance and struggles deeply as investigation. The final judgment, therefore, depends on what a biography owes its subject: affection, truth, entertainment, or the courage to hold all three in the same frame. That is where the analysis must end, by looking past the scores and asking what the film ultimately says about talent, trauma, control, and the dangerous comfort of turning a complicated human being into a myth. The film's ending, and the full meaning behind it, requires spoilers. Michael closes at the height of the bad era, with its subject stepping toward another arena filled with people waiting to surrender themselves to him. It is framed as liberation. Michael has escaped Joe's management, claimed authority over his work, and transformed childhood fear into global power. Yet the image contains a darker possibility the film barely acknowledges. Perhaps Michael has not escaped the system that consumed his childhood. Perhaps he has simply built a larger version of it, one where perfection is still compulsory and the audience has replaced his father as the authority he cannot disappoint. The cage is now an arena. It only looks like freedom because everyone is cheering. That is the film's most compelling theme: perfection as a survival strategy. Joe teaches young Michael that mistakes invite humiliation, pain, and withdrawal of approval. Michael responds by becoming almost impossibly precise. Every note must land. Every turn must stop at the correct angle. Every audience must be conquered. The tragedy is that the strategy works. Perfection protects him, enriches his family, and eventually gives him enough leverage to remove Joe from management. But a coping mechanism rewarded on that scale does not simply disappear after the threat is gone. It becomes identity. Michael cannot stop performing because performance is where fear becomes admiration and vulnerability becomes command. Jaafar Jackson communicates this idea more effectively than the screenplay. On stage, his Michael appears complete. Offstage, he seems assembled from protective gestures: the softened voice, lowered eyes, careful smile, and hands held close to the body. The contrast suggests that the public figure is not fake. It is almost too real, the version of Michael into which he has invested the greatest discipline. The private man feels less finished because nobody taught him how to exist without delivering something. That is why the film's quietest moments carry more sadness than its openly emotional speeches. When applause ends, Michael does not relax into himself. He appears to lose the structure holding him together. Childhood is therefore not presented as something Michael leaves behind. It becomes the emotional country to which he repeatedly returns. He surrounds himself with wonder, fantasy, and the promise of experiences he was denied. In the film's preferred interpretation, this is an attempt to reclaim innocence rather than evidence of arrested development or something more troubling. That reading is dramatically understandable, but it is also where the authorized nature of the production becomes impossible to ignore. Michael wants childhood to explain its subject while refusing to investigate every consequence of that fixation. It uses trauma as a key, but only opens doors leading towards sympathy. Control becomes the second major theme. Joe controls the rehearsals, Motown controls the material, record executives control promotion, lawyers control contracts. Michael's rise is structured as a series of victories over people who decide what he may do, until he possesses the money and influence to construct worlds around his own imagination. Thriller is the clearest expression of that transformation. Michael no longer enters somebody else's production. The production expands to contain his vision. Dancers, makeup artists, musicians, cameras, and entire streets bend toward an idea originating inside him. Fuqua presents that control as artistic emancipation. The uncomfortable question is what happens when a person shaped by domination finally gains the ability to dominate every environment himself. The film gestures toward loneliness as the price. The larger Michael's world becomes, the fewer people can approach him without passing through employment, fandom, family expectation, or business interest. Crowds know his movements, but not his interior life. Advisors protect him while benefiting from his success. Family members love him while remaining tied to the machine that formed him. Fame does not isolate Michael by removing people. It isolates him by filling every space with people whose relationship to him is impossible to separate from the phenomenon. That is a richer idea than the screenplay fully develops, yet Dion Beebe's images repeatedly capture it. One body illuminated before thousands, visible to everyone, and accessible to almost no one. Fuqua's movie is strongest when it allows that contradiction to remain unresolved. The concert scenes are exhilarating, and the exhilaration is part of the tragedy. We understand why Michael keeps returning to the stage because the film makes us feel the power waiting there. He lifts a hand and an arena obeys. He pauses and thousands scream into the silence. For someone raised under relentless authority, that reversal must feel intoxicating. The audience becomes a source of love, but also another dependency. Michael needs the roar. The crowd needs the miracle. Neither side is encouraged to see the exhausted human transaction beneath the spectacle. This is why the movie's omissions hurt more than ordinary biographical compression. By stopping in the late 1980s, Michael ends before the contradictions inside its own themes demand consequences. Childhood, isolation, absolute control, and increasing dependence on public adoration are established, but the film cuts away before exploring where those forces lead. Lionsgate has confirmed that another film is in development, with the studio saying that a substantial amount of material has already been shot. That continuation will determine whether this first chapter was careful preparation for confrontation or simply the safer half of an authorized mythology. Commercially, the strategy has already worked. By mid-June 2026, Michael had surpassed Bohemian Rhapsody to become the highest-grossing music biopic in worldwide theatrical history, crossing approximately $932 million. That achievement guarantees the film a place in industry history, but its cultural legacy will be more complicated. It has introduced younger viewers to Jackson's performance language, restored his music to the scale of a theatrical event, and demonstrated that the music biopic can function like franchise cinema. Yet its success may also encourage more estates to treat biography as brand preservation. Difficult lives converted into controlled emotional journeys, complete with iconic costumes, familiar songs, and carefully managed pain. As cinema, Michael is too polished to dismiss and too protected to completely trust. Fuqua stages performance with force, Beebe gives the concert scale, the design departments turn cultural memory into physical space, and Jaafar Jackson accomplishes something remarkably difficult. He evokes Michael without reducing him to a sequence of mannerisms. Coleman Domingo supplies the danger and psychological weight the broader film often avoids. But John Logan's screenplay repeatedly chooses clarity over contradiction. It tells us how Michael Jackson became famous more convincingly than it tells us who fame allowed, or forced, him to become. My final rating is 7 out of 10. As a concert experience, it is thrilling. As an origin story, it is emotionally coherent. As a biography, it remains incomplete not merely because it ends early, but because its reverence limits its curiosity. Fans seeking the music, movement, and scale of Michael Jackson's ascent will find plenty to treasure. Viewers seeking an uncompromising examination of the man should approach it as one perspective shaped by extraordinary access and obvious allegiance. Michael preserves the miracle. It recreates the sound, the silhouette, and the moment a frightened child discovered he could command the world. What it cannot yet do is stare directly at the cost of that command. The film ends with Michael walking toward the light and millions of people waiting beyond it, triumphant, beautiful, terrifying, because by then the boy has escaped his father. But he may never escape the need to perform.